Julius Caesar, military genius, empire builder, conquering hero. He was antiquity's ultimate emperor, the man with his head on the coin. But the coin had two sides. There was also Julius Caesar, sex addict and ruthless killer. When he wasn't in bed with someone else's wife, perhaps genocide was on the agenda.
In the league table of history's mass murders, Caesar is up there with Hitler and Stalin.
So what was behind the bad behavior?
I think we can ask, is he sick or just obsessive?
Investigators will explore ancient writings, including Caesar's own memoirs, to uncover the truth. They'll put events in his life to the test and reveal new medical evidence about the illness that caused his rapid deterioration. A forensic psychiatrist will dissect Caesar's personality to flush out the demons and see how he compares with other ancients behaving badly. Julius Caesar had an empire and an ego to match. He declared himself dictator of Rome for life, and his allies became his enemies. It didn't help that he'd been sleeping with their wives, prancing around in a laurel wreath and purple toga, even changing the calendar to have a new month named after himself. Everybody had had enough. They crowded around him in the Senate chamber, and the daggers came out. Even his friend Brutus was in on it, muttering, it said, these words as his long knife plunged home: "Sic semper tyrannis." This is what happens to tyrants. To understand Caesar better, Psychiatric Mallet will examine his behavior and position him on a unique behaving badly psychograph, revealing how he compares to tyrants like Genghis Khan and Caligula.
I'm going to look at the life of Julius Caesar to see if he's a charismatic leader, to see if he's sane, or to see if he's a psychopath.
At first glance, it's not looking good for Caesar. He watched 20,000 helpless women and children starve to death.
Warriors, these are women and children. But Caesar shows no mercy, no compassion.
He let his soldiers slaughter 40,000 Gauls after beating them in battle.
In his war of conquest, he killed or enslaved a third of the population. That act of genocide.
He ordered the hands of 2,000 Gauls chopped off, had a band of pirates crucified.
Caesar is sending out a signal. He's letting people know he is somebody to be reckoned with. Do not cross him.
Nobody said no to Caesar, least of all in bed. When it came to sex, he was predatory and insatiable. How do we know all this? Caesar told us himself in his memoirs. Others picked up the story, included Roman historians Suetonius and Plutarch, who lived 100 years or so after Caesar's death. They depicted a man who was ruthless and supremely ambitious. To get a sense of what formed Caesar's character, we must go back to his childhood. He grew up in Rome, the heart of the Roman Empire. Not in the aristocratic grandeur of the Palatine Hill, but here in the seedy, brothel alleyways of Subura.
Caesar's family were aristocrats. It's been generations. They haven't tasted wealth or power. Now the high and mighty of Rome and the senators are over on the Palatine Hill. That's like Park Avenue. This is like Parks.
Growing up on these mean streets was a fall from grace that had an impact on the young Caesar.
Julius Caesar is well aware of the glorious past of his family, and he feels very deeply the disconnect of his present circumstance to that past. He could have become very bitter, very angry, but instead he decides to climb that social and political ladder to where he should, in his mind, be.
With a goal like that, you can never climb high enough.
How is he going to climb his way, literally, back up the hill? The Roman army is the perfect place to start.
He'd had a fascination with the army since childhood. One of his heroes was the consul Sulla, who used his military might to seize control of Rome during a civil war. Power at the point of a spear. He joined the army at the age of 20 and distinguished himself with battlefield bravery in Greece. But that's not what everybody was talking about.
There is a story that appears in some of the sources that Caesar had a sexual relationship with the king of Bithynia, which is in northern Turkey.
It was supposed to be a business trip. Caesar was in Turkey to negotiate with King Nicomedes for warships to aid the Romans. The talks dragged on, and some say turned from ships to other matters, and possibly took place in the royal bedchamber. Smirking gossips called Caesar the Queen of Bithynia.
Within the Roman world, relations between men are much more accepted than they were in later societies. What the damaging thing to say is that he was passive in a sexual relationship with the king, a role that is, in their view, too much like being a woman.
The story haunted Caesar. His response was pure alpha male. He'd prove his manhood by seducing every woman in sight. Single, married, it didn't matter. As to whether he'd ever had an encounter with King Nicomedes, there's no proof either way. And the crafty Caesar used the gossip to his advantage.
This is a person of power. The king of Bithynia is a king. And that automatically lifts up the reputation and the prestige of Julius Caesar. He's above his fellow senators. He's now with royalty. You can take the rest of the story for what you will.
Caesar's vigorous and frequent sexual exploits with both women and men inspired the poets. It's not all romance. The scribe Catullus, writing during Caesar's lifetime, took a more clinical approach, suggesting in a verse that Caesar had come down with a dose of something bad. Was Catullus saying Caesar was so promiscuous that he'd contracted a transmitted disease, or was this just artistic license?
The four common venereal diseases to think about, there's syphilis, there's herpes, and of course there's gonorrhea. And it's pretty clear from the evidence that syphilis was not around in Roman times. Syphilis came from North America with the conquistadors.
So syphilis is ruled out. What about herpes and gonorrhea? They'd have left physical marks on Caesar. One would have mentioned it. They can also be eliminated. That leaves one possibility.
Chlamydia, though, for women, but for men, it doesn't have, unless you're one of the unfortunate people that had developed prostatitis, which, again, there's no certainly record of Caesar having such a problem. It's not going to affect his ability to rule the Republic/Empire one bit.
It was a problem for the women Caesar had sex with, but for him, no big deal. This promiscuous young man led a charmed life. Caesar moved from the army to politics and the law. He was a powerful and persuasive speaker. His court cases drew great crowds. Rome buzzed with talk of a brilliant young man in their midst. Caesar, still in his 20s, was well on his way to greatness. On a trip to Greece, he showed how calculating and fearless he could be when he was captured by pirates.
At the time, pirates have become a major problem for the Romans, infested the Mediterranean. And Caesar is yet another person to be captured by pirates. They realize, looking at him, this is a person of high status. This is a person to fetch a lot of money. They demand a big ransom, 20 silver talents.
In today's money, that's over £80,000, a lifetime's wages for one of Caesar's soldiers.
Caesar laughs at them. He says he's worth way more than that, 50 talents.
It was a daring gambit, but increased Caesar's chances of staying alive and gave him a measure of control over his situation.
Caesar demonstrates that he's cool in the face of great danger. In fact, he comes up with a brash and clever plan to secure his release. It's almost like he's James Bond, laughing in the face of his archenemy.
Caesar also went on the offensive, turning into the guest from hell. He ordered the pirates around, demanded they be quiet when he wanted to sleep, recited his own poetry, and berated them for not eating it. The pirates had had enough. They wanted their money. If they didn't get it, they'd kill Caesar. But Caesar raised the stakes and issued a dire threat of his own. If they released him, he promised to return and kill them. One way or another, somebody would die. Julius Caesar, still in his 20s, was already a carpe diem, stay sort of person. When Greek pirates held him for ransom, he made a promise. He'd escape and then come back and crucify them all. The pirates just laughed. When the ransom was repaid, Caesar was released. He then raised a small naval force and made good his threat. He crucified the pirates, a most painful and lingering death. But first, he ordered their throats cut.
All of Rome was talking about it. It was like a major news item. He was simultaneously decisive, brutal, and in control, but with a touch of humanity. He slit the throat of his captors to put them out of their misery. Did it happen like this? Is he just making it up? It's great PR. What we know about Caesar in his later life is he's in control. It has the ring of truth to it.
Julius Caesar, dashing young pirate slayer. Women swooned, and he moved in for a different kind of kill. He's said to have slept with almost all of Rome's aristocrats. He worked his way through 4 wives of his own. So what was he really up to?
Lots of politicians and powerful men sleep with women. They enjoy the thrill of the secret sex. However, Caesar, in addition, uses his sexual behavior to dominate women and, by extension, to show his dominance over their husbands.
He was sculpted. He was chisel-jawed. He was Mr. Irresistible. That at least is how art sculptors have depicted Caesar over the centuries. No wonder the girls fell for him. But Caesar took care of his appearance, getting his toga to fit Joe, combing his hair to cover his bald patch. So was Caesar really a matinee idol?
When we think about what Julius Caesar looked like, we have some portraits that we can examine, and we have likenesses of him on his coins. But for a person as famous as Julius Caesar, we just don't have that much evidence.
A remarkable discovery pulled from a French river in 2008 can help. A marble Caesar head over 2,000 years old. It's believed to be one of only a handful ever found that were carved during his lifetime. Is it a true likeness? Forensic art Victoria Lywood believes it's the face of a real person.
The facial lines of a 50-year-old man were in his forehead, crossing his nose, his vertical glabellar lines through the top of his head. This looked to me like this was an artist had possibly done this during the time of Caesar's life.
Using face mapping technology, Victoria set out to reproduce the real face of Caesar, with his missing nose.
We're very lucky in this reconstruction in that he has two pieces that I don't usually have to work with in skeletal reefs, and that is the bridge of the nose and the columella, the little piece under your nose that holds up the tip. Now, it's the soft tissue and tip that's missing here. 60% of the vertical length of your nose is how far your nose will project if you have a nose that's aesthetically correct. So we now have a general shape of Caesar's nose and how far it should project from his face.
Now Victor adds elements to the face to generate a photorealistic image. Then the years are rolled back, and Caesar comes to computerize the face of the ambitious young Caesar, the face that wooed the women. Over the next few years, Caesar aimed high, nothing less than the top job, consul, the head of the government for the Republic of Rome. But just as today's political parties can rack debt on the campaign trail, so did Caesar. This debt could have killed his career stone dead. So he was on the lookout for allies, money, and suggested an alliance with the wealthy Crassus and the military hero Pompey. They agreed. It didn't matter that he'd had affairs with both their wives. They weren't about to say no to a man on the make.
Forget the fancy titles, consul, high priest and so on. What this is about is a city being divided up between the equivalent of three powerful mafia bosses. It's about patronage and power, deciding who gets the fat contracts, like in a modern city, who clears the garbage, who controls the teamsters. Ancient Rome is just the same. These are the three powerful players in the Roman Empire, and they're deciding how they're going to divide up the spoils.
Caesar's share of the spoils included Roman Gaul, made up of what is now northern Italy and parts of modern-day France. He became governor, and that gave him absolute power. But he was a governor with a problem. He was still in debt. He decided to go to war. In Roman times, it was good business, money to be made in pillaged treasure and slaves. His target, the unconquered parts of Gaul.
We need to completely revise the way we think about warfare. Nowadays, we worry about how many dollars it's going to cost. In Caesar's day, what he's thinking about is how much profit can be made out of conquest, because Rome was essentially a system of robbery with violence.
We know what happened next, thanks to vividly described frontline dispatches from Caesar himself. I came, saw, I conquered, he boasts. It was all image building for the folks back home.
Caesar knew exactly how his victories would Rome. That was one of the reasons he was fighting in the first place. And if you think about what happens in the Second World War, generals like MacArthur, Patton, the British Field Marshal Montgomery, they cultivated relationships with their own favourite reporters because they wanted to get the best publicity they could. Well, in Caesar's case, it's the same, and he's his own reporter.
This obsessive attention to detail revealed a crucial element of Caesar's personality.
Psychologically, he needs to be in control of his image. He's not going to leave it to other people. He is going to be the one to decide who Julius Caesar is.
Caesar took his big ego to the battlefield, and the Gauls quaked. 60 miles west of Dor lay Bibracte, one of the most important hill forts in Gaul, scene of a bloody battle with the Gallic Helvetii tribe.
Where I'm standing, I'm 2,500 feet up. It's the highest place for 150 miles, and it completely dominates this landscape. So it was absolutely crucial for the Gauls to hold it, but it was equally crucial for Caesar to try to take it. So there was a major clash here, a huge battle between the two sides.
Evidence has been found that shows just how less the fighting was here. Skulls pitted with sword marks. Caesar, writing about the battle that took place here, stated that he were the bravest of all Gallic tribes. And archaeologists have uncovered evidence that reveals how Caesar deployed the most terrifying weapon in the vast Roman armory, aiming to inflict maximum death and destruction.
This is an extraordinary discovery. It's one of Julius Caesar's high-tech weapons, an incendiary bomb, effectively, from 2,000 years ago. This is the head of an arrow that would have been shot out of a Roman catapult. I've never seen anything quite like it. The point at the end, this wire cage here, designed, one assumes, to contain some sticky substance that would have been on fire as it flew through the air, and it would have been designed to set a Gallic settlement on fire. This is an example of the kind of high-tech warfare the Gauls were up against fighting Caesar.
Caesar also armed his legions with the pilum, a javelin-like weapon. Caesar's gloating frontline dispatches recorded their terrible effect. The spears tore through shields and skewered the warriors. It could have been Caesar's self-promoting hype, or it could be deadly accurate.
A pilum is a uniquely Roman weapon, right? It's specifically designed for the army, and it's specifically designed to kill your opponent. It's designed to throw at very short distances towards a mass rank of enemies.
John Serrat is going to test Caesar's claims to see how effective it is against the Gallic shield.
So this is our mock-up of a Gallic shield. It's not an exact replica of a shield. We've eliminated the boss. It's not necessarily the exact shape of a shield, but we know they used heavy wood. So we have 3 planks. This is ½ an inch oak wood here and covered with tan treated leather. What we're going to do is have our pilum thrower launch it at the shield just to test its penetrative power.
And in the role of Roman legionary for the day is Mike Hunt, international javelin thrower.
Well, we've got a penetration. It went through a good 6 inches, and the weight which is now on the shield is tremendous. So even if it's not going through to kill the enemy, it's rendered his shield useless. So he would have had to drop his shield and expose his entire left side to the Roman swordsman in front of him.
The verdict? Against a weapon like this, the Gauls didn't stand a chance.
Well, Julius Caesar was a master of self-promotion and propaganda. A lot of what he said would have been exaggerated. Here, he was not lying. There's no doubt that the poor Gaul who was behind this shield would be long since dead. So, Caesar was right.
The pilum shattered Gallic front lines. But the Gauls had hundreds of thousands more soldiers than Caesar. If Caesar was to win, he'd have to kill on a massive scale. Julius Caesar was on a mission to make himself a hero in Rome by conquering Gaul. One by one, he sacked and pillaged Gallic towns and villages, each victory adding to his wealth. Now he approached Avaricum, 150 miles south of modern-day Paris, where the Gallic defenders waited behind fortified walls. Caesar laid siege to the town for 25 days. When he finally stormed the walls, he overran the weakened defenders. Now, the serious killing began. Caesar's legions slaughtered 39,000 men, women, and children. 800 left alive to carry a stark message to other Gauls: resistance is futile. With the laying waste and pillage out of the way, it was time for some Roman style. Caesar had a standing order. After a victory, the soldiers were to be turned loose to do as they pleased. He bragged that his men fought just as well when they stank of perfume.
Having sex with captives, with women, prostitutes who follow the Roman army. This is just par for the course. Everyone, every Roman does this.
But there was worse to come. Caesar finally revealed the true extent of his cruelty at the climax of war in Gaul on a battleground 125 miles east of Avaricum. This huge mound was Alesia, a hill fort. Here, Caesar faced an army of 80,000 led by Gaul's most successful commander, Vercingetorix.
Vercingetorix retreated with his 80,000 men onto an immensely strong natural fortification. A little bit like this rock, if you can imagine it, a mile across, but with sheer cliff faces like this, making it the kind of fortification which really Caesar couldn't contemplate taking by storm. So what does he do? Builds a great wall around the outside, 10 miles long, heavily fortified, to keep these 80,000 Gauls penned up inside until they're starved into submission.
It was a killer siege. Vercingetorix had inflicted heavy casualties on Caesar's army earlier that year. Now it was time for revenge. But Gallic riders broke through the fortification. Reinforcements were now inevitable. So Caesar created another barricade, this time around his own men. It was finished just in time. 250,000 Gallic reinforcements turned up just as it was finished. As the weeks passed, the penned-in Gauls in the fort starved. Desperation, Vercingetorix let 20,000 women and children leave the fort, believing Caesar would let them pass.
Thousands of people, old people, women, children, useless mouths in terms of war, cast out into this no man and then denied any escape by Caesar, so they simply die of starvation. As far as Caesar's concerned, he doesn't even count the numbers. They're just collateral damage.
The Gallic fighters watched helpless their wives and children slowly perished. Was this the action of a psychopath? Or did it make good strategic sense?
This is certainly a tremendously ruthless act. However, at this point, Caesar has calculated that the ends justify the means.
The siege of Alesia ended with a final pitched battle. Vercingetorix and 6,000 Gauls broke out of the fort and stormed a weak point in the Roman lines.
The pitched battle has lasted all day, tens of thousands of men, and the Gauls are mentally and physically exhausted. And Caesar commits the last reserve. He tells us that he leads that last reserve into action in person, wearing a scarlet cloak so he can be recognized. And the Gallic army shatters like a pane of glass, and the battle is over.
Caesar wrote that had his men been so exhausted from battle, not a Gaul would have been left alive. Caesar fought on, but the battle at Alesia was the last realized resistance by the Gallic armies. Vercingetorix was held captive for 5 years, then taken to Rome. He was paraded through the chains. At the climax of the parade, he was strangled.
No one could deny that Caesar was a military genius. The conquest of Gaul was one of the greatest military campaigns in history, but it came at an enormous cost in human suffering.
It took Caesar 9 years to subjugate the Gauls, but he wanted to make sure knew they were beaten. 2,000 captured resistance fighters would carry the message.
Caesar ordered that both hands of every man should be cut off. And these mutilated men were then sent back to their villages to act as a warning. The systematic use here of terror as a way of intimidating people into not fighting back against the Romans.
Caesar made a fortune conquering Gaul. Finally, free from debt, he pursued his real goal, Rome. But his alliance had broken down. The wealthy Crassus was dead, and the warrior Pompey, now in charge, was having second thoughts about Caesar. His political opponents accused him of war crimes. If Caesar set foot in Rome, he'd be prosecuted. Worse, the conqueror would soon be feeling a little conquered himself, having blackouts and seizures. Investigators can finally identify the mysterious illness that was to cripple the most powerful man on the planet. 49b. The River Rubicon, the border to Italy. On its banks stood Caesar and his army.
The Rubicon has become a byword for passing the point of no return. It's often used about military operations. The Americans talked about crossing the Rubicon when they first went into Iraq.
Caesar was about to make the most important decision of his political life. As governor of Gaul, he couldn't be prosecuted for riding roughshod over the Senate's laws. As soon as Caesar crossed the Rubicon, he entered Roman territory. He lost immunity, and his enemies could pounce. His only protection was to take him with him, but that would be a declaration of war.
Caesar knows that if he crosses the river, he breaks one of the fundamental laws of the Roman state. He's launching a military coup. It's the biggest decision of life. And we get a real insight into his mind when we learn that at that moment, what he says, making the decision in Latin, is, "Let's roll the dice."
Did Caesar really have the mind of a gambler?
Caesar really doesn't believe that this is a 50-50 proposition. He knows that the odds are in his favor, though there is a major risk. Psychologically, crossing the Rubicon means that he's thrown out the rule book completely. It's a whole new ball game. He is in charge.
The 50-year-old Caesar crossed the Rubicon with his army and marched on Rome. His former ally, Pompey, was all that stood between Caesar and absolute power.
Remember that life expectancy in Roman times was much lower than it is today, so a man in his 50s was considered to be very old indeed. Caesar probably thought that he was on borrowed time, and he seems to have made a decision from that point on that he was going to force the pace of events.
He chased Pompey and his armies around southern Europe, and after 4 years of bloody civil war, defeated him. Now Caesar was the absolute leader of the Roman Empire. He was a living legend. But Pompey wasn't his only victory campaign. His sexual conquests included the Queen of Egypt, the fabled Cleopatra. She was just 22, and he was 50, an old man by the standards of the day. And when he met the wife of another world leader, the king of the North African state of Mauritania, he bedded her as well. Caesar was getting older, and Suetonius and Plutarch report that he wasn't quite the man he was.
Julius Caesar becomes increasingly ill. Blackouts, fainting spells, fits. What was the cause of this? Was it malaria, or was it some other cause?
Clearly, he needed to see a doctor. Neurosurgeon Robert McLachlan, Caesar's fits were caused by a worm he caught on his conquests in Egypt.
Caesar, about a year before he had his first seizure, had spent a considerable amount of time in North Africa, specifically in Egypt. And we know that cysticercosis, which is basically a condition related to the pig tapeworm, was endemic in Egypt at that time because we've seen evidence of it in Egyptian mummies.
Worms. The effects are horrific.
I would liken it to the script of a bad horror movie. A person has a giant worm inside their belly. That worm produces eggs, which result in small worms, which migrate to the brain where they produce cysts. They sit in these cysts as a little worm, creating
worms eating away at the brain, causing fits. In Roman times, there was no pill for this. Caesar was for the first time truly helpless. It was devastating.
Psychologically, the effect of Caesar's epilepsy is to show him he's no longer in control. He's no longer invincible. He is, in fact, quite mortal like everyone else.
With time running out, Caesar to cement his position, calling himself dictator for life. But even this was enough. He wanted to be king.
A key moment that takes place right in the heart of Rome is Julius Caesar standing on the rostra. The crowd is in the piazza in front of him. And Mark Antony approaches the rostra, comes over to Julius Caesar, and offers him a crown. People are wondering what's going to happen. Caesar refuses it. There is some cheering. Mark Antony again insists and gives him the crown. Caesar refuses it again. Now the crowd erupts. They're ecstatic. Now, this seems to be a PR stunt gone wrong, because there's no way that Mark would have been acting on his own. This has to be because Caesar is allowing him to do so. Caesar is testing the waters, and the people do respond. They love Caesar if they do not want a king.
So Caesar wouldn't be a king, he'd just act like one. The decrees flew fast and furious. He ordered that his statue be placed alongside those of the old kings of Rome. That a new calendar be created, one that included a month after himself, July. And that a coin be struck bearing his laurel-wreathed image. He was getting too big for his toga.
For us, seeing a ruler on a coin is no big deal. But for an ancient Roman, it was astounding. This is all the rules, because in and throughout Roman history, you never depicted a person living on a coin. Now, Julius Caesar is doing it. So what he's saying is very, very powerful. He's telling the people, I'm not just your leader, I am your ruler. He's very, very close to saying, I am like king.
The Romans didn't like kings, didn't trust them, and didn't want anything to do with them. It had been that way for 400 years. That was why they were a republic. But Caesar took no notice. He was out of control.
Caesar tightening his grip on Rome. He's pushed through a whole series of reforms through until 44 BC. And now there's a growing discontented body of senators. At the there's one senator, Cassius, a longtime rival of Caesar, and also Junius Brutus, someone that Caesar considers his friend.
The sexual exploits that had taken Caesar to the top came back to haunt him. It was bad enough that he'd slept with Cassius's wife, but worse, he did the same with Brutus's mother. He decided the universal rule, don't sleep with your friend's mother, didn't apply to him. Any goodwill Caesar had with the senators was long gone. They decided there was only one solution: assassination. March the 15th, 44 BC. The Ides of March. Caesar never saw it coming. 23 dagger blows brought him down. The last face he saw may well have been that of his one-time friend and ally, Brutus, as he uttered the words, "This is what happens to tyrants." Caesar, the aristocrat born in the mean streets of Rome, clawed his way out of the slums to become the most powerful leader in the known world. His military campaigns had an appallingly high body count. Almost 20% of the entire population of Gaul, the equivalent of 12 million in modern UK terms. So where does the behavior of this ancient behaving badly put Caesar on the psychopathic scale of tyrants?
Caesar does have a bloodlust. He doesn't kill for killing's sake. The violence is directed towards building an empire with himself in the center.
He's not a kill-for-kicks psychotic like, for example, Caligula. Caesar's at the other end of the scale, a ruthless, iron or goal-driven killer. That's one aspect of his personality. There's another to consider.
A second dimension of Caesar's personality is what one would call sexual dominance. Sex is not only for pleasure, but to dominate the world around him.
It's about power and control. On this scale of sexual dominance, Caesar rates very highly. This is the psychological profile of Julius Caesar. So who in history had similar traits?
I think Julius Caesar is most like Genghis Khan. They both came from noble lineage that had fallen on hard time. They both developed a vision of empire with the necessary armies and physical violence to back it up. And along the way, both bedded every woman they could.
But the assassins had misjudged the mood of the people. The victories on the battlefield brought glory to Rome, and the people loved him for this. They didn't believe him a tyrant. To honor him, they built a funeral pyre, burned his body. Then they turned their wrath on the conspirators who had killed their conquering hero. The murderers fled the city to save them. Caesar wanted to be king, but the new Senate made him more than that, much more. A statue of Caesar was put in the Pantheon, a building dedicated to the gods of Rome, and in death he was made a god. The first person to receive that honor since Romulus, the founder of Rome 700 years before.